Good morning, everyone. Sir, thank you for actually staying and listening to me talk. Distinguished guests, everyone else, it's a pleasure to be here, but I want to point out that there's some friendly Navy faces in the audience. I know there's some Army cadets behind them, but being that I'm Navy, round of applause for you guys. Thank you. Okay. Thanks for having me here today. I'm going to go through a couple different things as I walk through this. This is the list of topics I'll be going through. I want to explain a little bit about what the Department of Homeland Security is, and being that I'm an old retired naval aviator, there's going to be a video because videos are cool. You need to have something that's alive. We'll talk about cybersecurity, some focus areas that I'm working on. It'll be a little different because I'm going to dive in a little bit more on where I'm trying to take the organization from more of an execution, operational point of view. Talk a little bit about changing cyber economics and a little bit about the workforce. All of these are challenge areas that we work through, that we have to deal with. So I'm going to ask everyone to tee up the video if you could right now. You can go watch the video online if you want to again too. But I wanted to give everyone a sense of who we are before I got into the presentation. So I spent the vast majority of my career at DoD, at the Navy, in fact about 35 years of it. So I wanted to put up a slide and very briefly show you what we're composed of. So you can see the operational components are in the light blue color over there and run everything from FEMA, which is in charge of when there's a national disaster. They're the first responders, and when a hurricane happens or a flood or whatever it is, FEMA's on station. They run to risk. That's in their nature. We've got the Coast Guard, but on the other hand, you have the Secret Service. You have TSA. Everyone loves TSA when they go to the airport. Immigration's work. There are some fundamental missions that these organizations that are operation do in the everyday protection of the United States homeland. Below that, in the lighter gray color, are the support components around the headquarters that obviously support the operational components. So you can see from looking at this slide that DHS is a fairly large organization responsible for Homeland Defense. It's also very complicated. It's a very complicated organization that does an awful lot of things on a daily basis. So I'm not going to read through everything up here, but if you can, take the time over a few seconds and look at what we accomplish every day through all those organizations. It's engaged in so many facets of work. So when you think of what are the data, the information that the network for DHS moves every day, it's incredibly important. Down there in the corner where you could see, right here, we engage across our country with the tribal authorities, with state and local law enforcement personnel. Critically important work. You can see the amount of things that we process coming across the border every day, the amount of people that get screened, how many folks get naturalized every day. The scope of what this department does is huge. So, our strategy, and if you have a chance, you can go online and read it in greater detail. It's what our secretary published. These are the 5 points that we walk through. So risk identification, speaking as a CIO, and this is the 3rd time I've done CIO. Does everyone know what CIO stands for? Career is over. So given that this is my 3rd time, I'm still striving for that low goal. But we have to be able to understand risk at the end of the day. What is our posture? What are we doing? How do we prioritize the activities that we do? The reality is, as a CIO or as a CISO, you live with risk every day. You just have to be able to prioritize it, understand how you're mitigating it. I cannot afford to knock down every risk that approaches my network. Vulnerability reduction. Spend a lot of time every day working down the vulnerabilities. Dealing with threat reduction. I run the network, Homeland Security Information Network, that does the communication of law enforcement information out internationally with the territories and with the states and local partners. Responding to consequences, how you mitigate them. We talked about WannaCry or Petya. How do you deal with those things? They're ever happening, they will continue to happen, and being able to mitigate them and make sure that the consequences of anything bad happening are low is fundamental to what I do. I want to enable positive cybersecurity outcomes. That's a lot of work. But anyhow, if you want to get a sense of the bigger strategy, just log on there and you could read it. I'm going to dig a little bit more into the things that we're actually doing at this point. So this is a little bit of a transition. Having been in DoD and DHS, government is pervaded by what I call old think. And for those of you who are familiar with an analysis of alternatives, you know that an analysis of alternatives and how we decide on what we're going to procure or develop sometimes takes years. It can cost a lot of money, and before you get there, the technology you want is out of date. What we're trying to do in DHS is move to a more agile process. We want to be able to quickly make build or buy decisions and make sure that that end state is actionable. And we have 5 pilots right now with agile development that we're moving forward on smartly. We accept failure in these because part of doing this, the new think that is being not afraid of failure, to learn from your failure. And you'll hear that theme come up again in my discussion. Cybersecurity, we want to move from a compliance-based, manual security scans, document-based mitigation to being real-time, threat-informed. Continuous risk management, constantly thinking about how the network is changing and what we have to respond to. And make sure that we put in continuous diagnostic monitoring, CDM, into our network. We're building that out. We're doing phase 1 and phase 2 of it this year. Supply chain risk management, really important. I spent a lot of time dealing with vendors. I spent a lot of time asking them very hard questions on how they're moving forward and ensuring that the things we buy, because let's be realistic, when you work for a government, we're not developing IT, we are buying IT. The IT we're buying is commercial off-the-shelf technology. That's where we're going, that's what we do. So we have to make sure we understand it in detail. But we want to be holistic, we want to be active, we want to understand things as they're happening. But more importantly, as things are discovered, and things are always discovered because code is complicated, how do we recover? How do we build in resilience? Resilience is an important theme. So I'm going to be talking about 3 initiatives that I'm dealing with. So when I walked into the department, I took a hard look at our network. We call it OneNet. I'm responsible for OneNet, that is essentially the transport mechanism for all of DHS. And I run what we call LAN A and LAN B. That's our NIPRNet and CIPRNet for the military guys, or unclass and secret. I want to transition it from what it is right now. We essentially have 3 or 4 vendors doing all the work. And I want to move to what we call a managed service. How do I bring in one prime vendor to run the network for us and make sure that we're moving from a perimeter defense kind of mentality into a modern future where we're looking at software-defined networks, how we're managing our data, how we're managing our security, our end-user hardware. This is about taking the technological debt that we have and transitioning it to something in the future. And the future is important. When I'm looking at this, I'm thinking about a 10-year contractual vehicle, a 5-year base with 5 options. And when you think of any contract that is 10 years in length, anything that I write down today and I look at 8, 9, 10 years from now, it's probably going to be different. Technology is moving at a very rapid rate. So we're taking the time as we develop this to understand, how do I write a requirement? And I'm not talking about old think requirements, I'm thinking about new think. So let's think about this in terms of outcomes. What is the outcome I want? Now, I'm not throwing away old think requirements because a help desk will probably always have some requirement that you can measure with a high degree of precision, response time. But what I'm really thinking about and where we have to think innovatively is, well, what will security look like 5, 6 years from now? I don't want to tie a vendor's hand to a particular kind of technology and force that on them. That might drive cost, that might drive risk with cyber. So thinking through how we move the network for how it's designed today into a more modern, responsive network across all of DHS is a prime task that we're taking on. We spent the last couple months laying out what the structure might be, and what we're doing right now is we're building out what we would call a requirements document with outcomes in it, statement of work, and the acquisition strategy. So we're moving forward very quickly on this to put in place a contract that we can start looking at into the next year. SOCs, or Security Operations Center. When I walked into the department, there were 16 security operations centers spread among the components. Some are 24/7, some are not. And I would question if a SOC could not be, if it's not 24/7, how could it be a SOC? 9 of them are in the capital region. The idea here is not really about cost savings, though I do believe there are cost savings here. The idea behind this, as with the other one, is how do we improve capability, make ourselves more modern? How do I drive out risk? How do I handle things and become more resilient? What I'd like to do is move to a primary SOC with a backup that's hot. There's a lot of work that has to go into this. We've spent the last couple months looking at the locations around the country, approximately 72, and narrowing it down to a list of 10. So out of that list of 10, we're looking very closely at, well, okay, what are the facilities and things that compose these 10 areas, and where might the best pick be? I visited a cyber fusion center that one of our industry partners runs down in Richmond, Virginia. So the factors that go into this sort of thing are, what are the educational institutions in the area? So Richmond, Virginia, for example, has 8 universities. It's very close to military bases, NetWarcom, which turns out a lot of information professionals for the Navy's there. There will be a lot of military folks coming out of the Navy, Army, Air Force that could be potential employees. It's got good power. It's far away from natural disasters. Those are the kinds of things we're working through right now to figure out what is the best location. But workforce is really important. And when you look at certain areas, the Washington, D.C. area is a high-cost area. In case anyone's been there, you know it's very high cost. Richmond offers about 26% lower costs in terms of salaries. And what you find is that people want to get to a smaller area with a lot of amenities. So we're looking through all of those things right now to figure out what is the right place. Now, alongside this area, and this is the more complicated piece in this puzzle, is each of the components have a CIO, and they have a CISO, and they run their own security operations, and we have to pull this all together. So what is in the SOC of the future? Now, I mentioned earlier, you have organizations like FEMA that have a very unique mission to respond to emergencies. There may be aspects of what they do that they need to retain even as we consolidate. So my CISO is working very closely with the other component CISOs to determine what are those unique things that need to remain with the components and somehow make sure that they're tied in or weaved into the structure of the consolidated SOC, and what are the things we should consolidate. The objective here is to get to reduced manpower, to get to common tools, and to get to a better overall security visibility of our entire network for the Secretary. I mean, that is a fundamental piece. Now, I fundamentally believe that having one SOC that's properly manned with trained personnel with the right tools is where we want to be. And that's where I'm going to try to drive us into the future. So we're looking at cloud. I know everybody and their brother's looking at cloud. We need to do it thoughtfully. Moving to the cloud is not a knee-jerk reaction. Walked into DHS, and the direction from the Secretary was, keep the components moving to the cloud. And right now, we have about 29 applications in the cloud across DHS, with about 70 so, or about that, in transit to get out there. But here's the deal. We want to get to the cloud, but we want to make sure that we get to the cloud in a way that provides the security, provides the data, provides the right cost structure for us. So we need to think that through. One of the things I established is a cloud steering group chaired by the Undersecretary. Now, for those of you who have ever been a CIO or been around CIOs, you know our power is limited. We don't control everything. I don't own contracting and procurement. I'm not the CFO, not in the components. You have to pull things together as this move to the cloud ensues from places outside of CIO. So what the cloud steering group allows and permits is for us to bring together all the people with responsibilities, the number twos out of the components, their CIOs, plus the other pieces like the CFO, the Chief Procurement Officer, and others who have play in how we move out to the cloud. Now here's what's fundamental. I mentioned earlier, you can't be afraid of failure. We have established stretch goals for each of the components and for headquarters, which I run. The idea here is to tickle out as we force people to begin looking at the cloud. What's your problem? Is it that you don't have enough training? Is it that you don't have enough technical? Do you not have the right contract vehicles to get there? Is my authority to operate procedures hindering you? What is it that's hindering you, and how can we help you better get there? So out of failure, we hope to identify those things and rectify them. For example, if it turns out, and I believe it will, that we need a different contracting vehicle to get at the companies that can do the virtualization and the modernization and the training, as well as access to the cloud service providers, we need to get that in place. Now, the view here is that we want to go to a multi-cloud strategy. I'm not talking 10s and 20s and 30s. I think it needs to be limited because we need to maintain security and control. So it's a multi-cloud, it's hybrid, and it's agnostic of vendor. I do believe at the end of the day, we will retain things on-prem because that's the right thing to do for some data. So shifting gears a little bit, we have to think about cyber attacks. And I think the president talked a little bit about cyber hygiene. I spent an awful lot of time talking about cyber hygiene because it's really simple. You know, I flew planes, and one of the things you do when you fly planes is you know your emergency procedures because something bad's going to happen. You're prepared for the worst. And that's what cyber hygiene is about. It's about preparing for the worst. How do we get to a position to maintain that cyber hygiene? We have to capture metrics. We have to make sure we're patching our systems. We have to update our operating systems. I recently signed out a policy mandating that all the components and the supporting organizations upgrade to Win 10 by the end of this calendar year. Now, it's very likely that many of them will not make it there, but the point is we're driving to get to modern operating systems. And that includes getting to embedded IT. We have to ensure that there's strong authentication built into all of this. We have to modernize and consolidate. We have to make sure we're managing our supply chain. Consolidation of SOCs is a key fundamental of this. What I'm talking about on one end is also part of this. We have to automate more. Patching should be done quickly and fast. We're not there yet. We have a lot of work. I've got to reduce our attack surface. Whitelisting. Shutting down unused web pages. And I will bet that many of you out here who run organizations, you have old web pages. You need to get those web pages down. Have to manage configurations better. This is a prime thing that I'm pushing my CISO on constantly. Manage configurations. How do I ensure that the right configurations are set up for whatever it is I'm putting in the cloud? That's critically important. I have to make sure my user base is aware and understands the cyber threats out there. So phishing training, just sending out simple emails to see if people will bite on it, and if they bite on it, we train them. You have to do those sorts of things, and I know people don't like to get caught in phishing exercises, but I'd rather catch you in-house than have the bad guys catch you and do something bad to my network. The old objective behind cyber hygiene is to ruin the attacker's return on investment. See, I like this slide. My speechwriter did it. I like the animation, a kind of bad guy popping up and doing something. Okay, the reality is I don't think there's a silver bullet in cyber. One of the things I've learned from years and years in the military and the government is we thrive on routine. Predictability is what we like in our processes. I like to know I'm coming in tomorrow morning and I'm going to have my first cup of coffee at 8 o'clock. We build process, right? Hey, the bad guys don't care about our process. They're popping up like the little guy popping up on the screen there at an unpredictable time. It's asymmetrical, and they're unpredictable. We have to think about our organizational routine being a hindrance to providing cyber protection. We have to think through the unpredictability of the adversary, and we're trying to build that in, but I still think it's a cool slide. All right, here's a problem I have. It's called hiring people. And I'm going to start with STEM graduates. 4.7 million. That's a lot of STEM graduates. And you can see where the U.S. is, 568,000. That's a big delta. It's not going to go away. Now, there are some things that offset that. Innovation's a key. And you can see where the U.S. falls on innovation up there. It's number 4. These are not U.S. government statistics. You can see up there that came from Forbes and other reports, the Global Competitiveness Report from 2015 to 2016. So while we're not graduating as many STEM students as the other countries are, our advantage is in innovation. Going back to that other slide, if we're innovative, if we think with originality, if we're creative, we could still win the game. But there's roadblocks. Right now, in cyber, we think there's about 299,000, 300,000 active job vacancies. That's 2017. 2022, 1.8 million. So you Navy guys and Army guys out there, if you're not thinking about IT, you might want to get into it. The salaries are attractive. I pay government wages. I recently had to hire a CISO. Let me tell you, I cannot match anything that the industry folks will pay a CISO to come work. Anyone that I would hire out of industry would take at least a 70% pay cut. Okay, so we're competing against different things when we have to hire into government. And here's one of the biggest things we're competing against. It's our hiring challenges. Now, these are very old presidents, and I'm taking you back to 1923 and to 1949. Those were the last two times that the U.S. civil service hiring processes were updated. And I laid out along the bottom here is the technology that was kind of common back then. I think it's a little different than what we're doing now. I think you'd agree. So our civil service system was basically started under Harding and Coolidge and refined once under Harry Truman. Right? That's a very long time ago. Think about it. It's almost 100 years old. Right? Different technology. So how do we deal with this? Okay, I mentioned I don't have a salary advantage. I've got a process out there for hiring people that's built on typewriter technology. Well, there are things that offset this, that I have as an advantage. I mean, working for DHS is a very interesting mission. It's challenging. It's about pride and professionalism. It's about national security. That motivates people to come in. And they're willing to put up with a lot of challenges to come in. But we need to change our hiring practices. So this is where we're trying to go. We're trying to be innovative within DHS, and we're trying to look at things differently. So I've laid out 4 quadrants up there, and you can see 20th century versus 21st century. Okay, we got to get streamlined. We have to get proactive in hiring, right? In the 20th century, and for those of you who have ever gone to USA Jobs Online, it's a focus on applications for very specific positions. We develop mandatory technical qualifications. We lay it out in great detail. But it's different. We have to be strategic. We have to look at a range of sources. I don't know where my next cyber expert's going to come from or my next IT expert's going to come from. We've had a lot of discussions within DHS about how do we go out and get that more diverse workforce of the future that we need. It's also got to be more flexible and dynamic. In the old days, a person would come into the government and they would do an entire career with the government. I think the millennial generation's a little different. They want to hop in, they want to hop out. It doesn't work like that in government right now. We have very defined career paths that I think limit advancement. I got to get it to be more dynamic, right? We have to allow, particularly in cyber and IT, because the innovation is out there in industry. We have to allow our people to go out there, get the experience, and be able to bring that experience in. A few weeks ago, I had a discussion with Suzette Kent. She's the federal CIO for the U.S. government. And we talked about how do we get there? How do we do something along the fellowship lines where we allow companies to send in people from, I don't know, your Googles, your Yahoos, other innovative companies to come into government for a couple years. And I assume that those companies will pay their salaries because none of them will come if they have to take a pay cut. And get them to work for us. And how do we send our people out there for a couple years to work in those companies to get the exposure to that and then bring that experience back to both places so we get a better understanding of how things work? We also have to get to market-sensitive pay. Right now, pay in the government is based upon tenure. The longer you're there, the more you move up, right? It's pretty much unionized. But pay rules have to be based on something called skills and capability. And we need to consider the value or the additional dollar that people in the cybersecurity field are paid in the industry. To get good people, we have to start thinking in that way. And we have to focus on performance management. Right now, if you've ever had to do performance management under the old system, you would realize it is bureaucratic. It's all about that routine. It's a lot of work, trust me, and the word burdensome there is not an understatement. But we have to be able to do it with continuous feedback. We have to be more constructive. We have to be more interactive with our employees and getting them there. So this is where we are working, and I'm working very closely with our human relations officer to get us more in this direction so we could be more proactive, more innovative in how we hire and bring people on. So I've talked about the things that we're doing. You know, from a DHS perspective, we have a broad mission that requires a lot of cyber expertise. We're very dependent on IT, as is everyone is. Getting the right people is key to our success. Okay, this is my last slide, and I will apologize that I used PowerPoint today. But I felt I wanted to do something different. Anyhow, this is the mission that I've been laying out for everyone. Protect, connect, and perform. You have to do those basics. I got to be able to protect our network. I need to connect everyone, and they need to perform their jobs. And the vision is to get to world-class IT to enhance and support the DHS mission. It's an important mission, and we need to support it with the best IT, the best workforce that's available, and I got to protect it with the best cyber experts. Anyhow, folks, that concludes my brief. Thank you for inviting me here to beautiful, sunny Estonia.